Between July 20th, 1969 and December 14th, 1972, 12 Americans walked on the moon. The modern moon landing hoax conspiracy theory movement started in 1976 with Bill Kaysing, a former U.S. Navy officer with a Bachelor of Arts degree in English who served as a senior technical writer by Rocketdyne, the company that built the F-1 engines used on the Saturn V rocket from 1956 to 1963, although some conspiracy theories were already in circulation as early as 1968. Hey guys, it's Lord of the Pogs. Every moon landing hoax conspiracy theory has been debunked. A 2-hour movie can be filmed in as little as 2 weeks, not taking into account Apollo 7, Apollo 8, Apollo 9, or Apollo 10. If the moon landings were faked, it would have taken at least 29 years to film them all. If NASA wanted Apollo 11 ready to air by summer 1969, they would have had to start filming in 1940, almost 20 years before NASA was founded. I addressed this with a moon hoaxer, and he told me they were able to do it all in the late 1960s because there were dozens of film crews filming on closed sets all over the country at the same time for 24 hours a day without breaks. So notwithstanding that no moon landing hoax conspiracy theory is grounded in any sort of reality, moon hoaxers are getting desperate to hold on to their alternate reality, even going so far to change their version of events in real time, as their theories are continually disproven using real science and common sense. The reason I'm going into all this is because I want to make it abundantly clear that I in no way, shape, or form put any stock whatsoever in any kind of moon landing hoax conspiracy theory. And there's 100 videos out there already debunking them all. That's not what this video is about. In this video, I want to discuss how the course of history would have been different if the moon landings had been faked. Not to add fuel to the fire, but to prove that if the Americans faked the moon landing, it would be impossible for the world to exist as it does today. If NASA had faked the moon landings, the Soviets would have known. Luna 15 flew to the moon at the same time as Apollo 11. Although Luna 15's exact mission was kept secret, the Soviets did exchange trajectory information with the Americans. There were no concerns of a collision, but the exchange was made to ensure that there would be no interference of radio transmissions. If Apollo 11 never went to the moon, what trajectory would they have given the Soviets? They would have attempted to track it. They tracked Apollo 13 and even sent 4 ships to the recovery area in the Pacific Ocean to assist with search and rescue if needed, so we know that they had the ability to track Apollo spacecraft. As an aside, if the Soviets had retrieved the Apollo 13 capsule, would they have been taken prisoner? Interestingly, no. The Americans and the Soviets had a pact to freely exchange astronauts or cosmonauts who landed in each other's territory. So if the Soviets had retrieved the Apollo 13 astronauts, they would have turned them over to the Americans. We may not agree with everything the Soviets did during the Cold War, but they weren't stupid. Even if NASA offered a viable explanation for why they were unable to track Apollo 11, it would have raised a few eyebrows in Moscow, and they would begin asking questions. Conspiracy theories in general are impossible because of their size and complexity. The moon landing hoax conspiracy theory would have had to involve more than 400,000 people who worked on the Apollo project for nearly 10 years, the 12 men who walked on the moon, the 6 others who flew with them as command module pilots, and another 6 astronauts who orbited the moon. Hundreds of thousands of people, including astronauts, scientists, engineers, technicians, and skilled laborers would have had to keep the secret. Oxford University physicist and cancer biologist David Robert Grimes devised a formula designed to calculate the lifespan of big conspiratorial beliefs before someone behind the scenes intentionally or unintentionally pulls back the curtain. It takes into account the number of conspirators, the passage of time, and the probability of a whistleblower. Grimes looked at the conspiracies of the NSA eavesdropping scandal that was exposed by Edward Snowden, the Tuskegee syphilis experiment, which withheld a cure from African American men, and an FBI scandal that led to wrongful detainment and execution of innocent people due to misleading forensic test results to approximate factors like the secret-keeping ability of a conspirator that ultimately maintains a secret, and he gave the imaginary conspirators in his model an unrealistically high capacity for secrecy to gauge what it would take for a conspiracy to be exposed. According to calculations, the moon landing hoax conspiracy theory would have broken down before the end of 1971. A greater number of conspirators reduces the lifespan of a conspiracy theory. To make it past 1975, only 2,500 of NASA's 411,000 payroll would have been in on the hoax, or about 0.5%. To make it to 1995, only 500 would have been involved, or about 0.1%. If 250, or about 1/25 of 1%, of NASA's payroll in 1965 were aware of the hoax, and no employees hired after that were made aware of it, then the hoax would have been exposed last year. After the Soviet Union fell in 1991, information about its space program, which had previously been kept secret, started to come to light, so people will find the answers they're looking for. If the Soviets had started digging for evidence of a hoax, they would have found it, and it would have been to their benefit. Sputnik demonstrated that the Soviet Union had the capability to deliver nuclear weapons over intercontinental distances and challenged American claims of military, economic, and technological superiority and triggered the space race to prove which superpower would achieve superior spaceflight capability. The Soviets appeared to be winning the space race early on by beating the US to firsts in space. First orbital launch vehicle. First satellite. First animal in orbit. First man-made object to escape Earth's gravity. First data communications to and from outer space. First man-made object to pass near the moon. First probe to impact the moon. First images of the moon's far side. First animals to safely return from Earth orbit. First probe launched to Venus. First person in space and in Earth orbit. First person to spend over 24 hours in space. Also the first person to sleep in space. First dual crewed spaceflight. First probe launched to Mars. First woman in space. First multi-person crew. First extravehicular activity. First radio telescope in space. First probe to hit another planet of the solar system. First probe to make a soft landing on and transmit from the surface of the moon. First probe in lunar orbit. First image of the whole Earth. First uncrewed rendezvous and docking. First living beings to reach the moon and return unharmed to Earth. First docking between two crewed craft in Earth orbit and exchange of crews. but its early lead was overtaken by the US Gemini program and the failure of the N-1 launch vehicle. If the Soviets uncovered evidence that the Americans faked the moon landing, they would have been eager to expose that and land on the moon themselves. As it was, they were on track to reach the moon by 1968 had it not been for the failure of the N-1. If they had exposed NASA, they would have continued developing the N-1 and landed on the moon as early as 1971. With the moon landing hoax exposed for the whole world to see and a red hammer and sickle flag actually on the moon, the Soviets would have not only boasted about their accomplishment, but also about the Americans' failure. The disappointment felt in the United States would have been far worse than Sputnik. If you think distrust in the government is bad in 2023, you should see it in the 1970s when the government claimed to have landed on the moon but faked it, then got exposed by the Soviets who actually did it. The moon landing hoax would have become a national embarrassment of epic proportions at a level we can't possibly imagine. The Soviets would have used their moon landing to showcase the communist system, reinforcing their illusion of scientific freedom and brilliance, spurring neutral countries not aligned with either NATO or the Warsaw Pact, mostly South America, Africa, and Asia, to eye communism as the correct way of life. Congress would have defunded NASA almost completely, launched an investigation, and brought NASA officials familiar with the hoax in to testify. After the Apollo 1 tragedy, there was an investigation and a full Senate hearing, which resulted in a 25-page report and a restructuring of NASA. If the Soviets revealed that NASA had defrauded the American people, the reaction in Congress, not to mention from Americans themselves, would have been unprecedented. Congress gave NASA $25 billion, about 13% of the federal budget at the time, to land on the moon, and they used it to film a movie? The Soviets, whom many Americans viewed as a backward people who produced shoddy technology, would have proven themselves better and more capable where Americans had failed. So what else were they right about? And what else was the US government lying about? Domestically, the reaction would have been far greater than the fallout after the Watergate scandal. If Congress was found to have known about the moon landing hoax and lied about it, which, let's be honest, congressmen by nature aren't good at keeping secrets, but if they did, the reaction from American citizens would have been something we can't even fathom. Think war protests and civil rights riots. And those were regarding issues the government was open about that had been around for a while. Conspiracy theorists would have had a heyday. Distrust in the government would have reached a level unheard of even in 2023. Part of what caused the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 was increased media freedom, which shed light on the many lies and conspiracies the government had. So if a moon landing hoax were uncovered, it would have sent shockwaves of civil unrest across the country. Internationally, the United States would have been seen as mismanaging the Western world, overwhelmed in Vietnam, and now lost the space race. This would have affected their influence over Western Europe and their status as a leader in the world, and the Soviet Union would begin to emerge as the world's dominant superpower. If NASA had faked the moon landing, the Soviets would have found out and milked the situation for all it was worth, severely damaging the United States' influence on the world stage and tarnishing its reputation almost beyond repair. The USSR would still be a world superpower, and countries like Cambodia, Laos, Congo, Angola, and Chile might be communist in the 21st century, not to mention Eastern European countries previously aligned with the USSR like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary. Going into the 2020s, the United States might have a better reputation than it did in the 70s and 80s, but the moon landing hoax would still be a major talking point, both internationally and domestically. During the Cold War and into the 21st century, there has been a push to move NATO eastward, but in a world where the United States lacked influence and the Soviet Union had a better reputation, there may have been a push to move the Warsaw Pact west. The political landscape of Europe, and the world for that matter, would be much different if Spain, Greece, Germany, Finland, Sweden, and Bosnia were all Warsaw Pact members. World events that transpired due to American influence, like Nixon's visit to China in 1976 or Reagan's tear down this wall speech in 1987, may never have occurred. Imagine if the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 to unite Germany under the communist government of East Germany. Americans would have little to no confidence in the ability of their country to do great things without cheating. And just like in 2023, we're still feeling the social and political reverberations from the Watergate scandal, the cultural impact of the moon landing hoax would still be a bleeding wound. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider dropping a tip. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and hit that little bell in the corner to get notifications on more videos like this one.